Friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are, another series, another episode, and the series I'm talking about is a special one with Etihad, and we've got episode 5 with Thomas Schurmann, Head of Cargo Operations and Delivery, and we're here live in Abu Dhabi, capital of the United Arab Emirates. Thomas, welcome. It's lovely to have you on board, and personally, it's absolutely fantastic to be back here in Abu Dhabi.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. Now, just a few little questions, and please feel free to elaborate wherever you need. First one, having spoken now to commercial and head of revenue, the expectation on consistency and efficiency from operations is way up there from a customer-centric perspective, and also safe and secure handling. Now, with regards to those particular statements, a lot of pressure. How do you personally, in charge of that particular operation, make sure that the wheels of expectation are turning effectively, and what are the key successes within your deliverables? It's a nice little warmer there for you, Thomas, so feel free to take that in any direction you feel.
Thanks, Chris. And I think there is more than one question in there.
There is indeed, yeah.
Indeed, there is pressure. There is pressure to deliver a robust and reliable operation, and rightfully so. And I think that pressure is just building up as markets are developing. But I think what is key is that we understand what our deliverables are, and that we have them clearly communicated between operations and commercial. And for us, we have a set of KPIs, clear metrics of how we want to measure our performance. Up there, the key measure is our delivered as promised, and that is what we have shared over the years with the commercial team, for them to clearly have a measure which they can also communicate back to the customer on how do we perform. And then the secondary one is obviously on our freighter side. How do we perform in regards to on-time performance for our freighters?
Yeah. Even since my days with Etihad, I know as things developed, the OTP became something that was quite popular. But what I'm now curious about, Thomas, is the Air Cargo Partner of Choice, which is a great title, but it's also a big challenge. How do you maintain that support of commercial and customer interaction from an operational perspective?
So the key measure, what I refer to as the delivered as promised, that is one we have implemented a few years back, but that is key because that is the measure which ultimately relates to the customer the most, because that is how we measure that the cargo arrives at the final destination in the given time, and that in relation to what the commercial team is basically promising the customer of us delivering against it. So that's why we took a few iterations over the years in order to get to the stage where we are today, to measure exactly this promise towards the customer, rather than just looking of what has been uplifted from origin, to take the look from the destination on whether it arrives on time and also in the given quality. And that is then relating to our special products and then commodities, where we put even more emphasis on the quality, on how the products actually arrive at the destination.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Now, there's a lot of talk about, how close can you get to your customers? And I know that's also key with the management outlook as well. As far as commercial departments are concerned, they always like to feel that they can influence and impress the customer, but they have to rely so heavily on the operation. So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges that you face?
Challenges, I think if I reflect on challenges as of today, I would say there's 3 main challenges we have out there in the market, driven probably by the developments of the last couple of years, being in a pandemic and now coming out of a pandemic. The handling environment is pretty much challenged at the moment. So we do have issues across the network, not only for Etihad. I think that is an industry-wide thing which we see, largely driven by shortage of labor, etc., etc. That is certainly one of the challenges. Another challenge, what we face on the operational side at the moment, is a cost pressure. So we are working in an inflationary environment that is not only for us, that is also for our handling partners. So a cost pressure is a second one. And then I think that is not new, but that is there forever, and probably that will remain forever, is a ever-changing regulatory environment where we need to adapt to.
Yep. You've hit the hat trick there quite well there, Thomas. Now, on the first one, labour. So how do you ensure competency levels are maintained and improved upon from within your organisation and obviously your core team? How do you make sure that your key staff are able to upskill, cross-skill, new skill, but to be agile enough to meet all the expectations?
So if I focus there on Etihad Cargo, and starting with the operational side, I think that the key word here is training. It's an easy word to be put out there. It actually needs to be embedded, and that is what we did in our organization. So we have resources dedicated to training, and what we rely on heavily is computer-based training, because it just gives you flexibility in terms of how frequently you can revise the courses, you can update courses, you can update course material, but also it gives flexibility to the staff on when to complete training and competency developments. So that is around cargo basics, that is around cargo products, and that is very much what we maintain internally, but we also give access to external training sources to basically develop skill sets across the board. That is on the pure training side. We do extend that to our commercial teams as well, so that they get the same level of access to training, especially when it comes to specialized products and in commodities. And another piece is we work in an ever-changing operational environment. That means we need to communicate on a short-term basis with changes required, which is then communicated through the famous bulletins out to the network, but also across the organization. And that is something where we have measures in place to actually actively encourage the workforce to read those, to acknowledge those, so that we make sure that the latest information has been passed on.
Good. Now I'm going to challenge you a little bit here, Thomas, because you mentioned there about the online training, which obviously was a need and a necessity going through the COVID period. Now, what I'm finding, and it's just my personal opinion, so I'll be interested to hear what your answer is, people are now getting a little bit frustrated with the LMS approach, because obviously you can't interact, you can't ask questions. It's almost becoming like a tick box exercise. Do you think now's the time to get more involved in practical coaching and making sure that people not only have attended or have witnessed or have signed off that they've received certain training, but that those competencies can be verified for your peace of mind and the peace of mind of your organization?
I think you have a valid point there, Chris. And yes, the computer-based training, there's a risk that you might just go through the courses and you just tick off the boxes. Nevertheless, in order to ensure that those trainings are meaningful and that there is a proper outcome of those, all of those trainings are basically, whether computer-based or classroom, they are all leading into a level of an exam where you need to make sure and you need to test the actually attendance and that the content has actually been consumed.
Yeah.
That is indeed.
Good answer. And now just pushing that little bit more, because we know each other, so I'm not giving you a hard time here. Some of those exercises, and I've done them myself as well. It's more of a memory test than it is a competency test. So what I'm trying to get feedback from people, experts like yourself, is whether or not now is the time to not only validate that somebody has attended and that they've been able to pass a memory test, which is based on either the hour or the 2 hours or the 1 day or the week of training, but to verify a little bit afterwards to see whether or not the retention of knowledge and the competency is at a level that one would expect.
And I think that is something which needs to happen continuously, and that is something which basically feeds back into the day-to-day business, and that is something which is then also, if I would put it back onto the line manager, to make sure that this competency is actually reflected in the day-to-day work, and that is then part of your monthly one-to-ones or your performance assessments, and basically take into consideration whether the competency level is where it needs to be and where it should be when assessing the role being done.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, and thanks very much for endorsing that. Now, the Etihad brand and the reputation, okay, it's strong and it always has been, and it's quite unique because of the regional location and also where it sits globally, but also the local competition. But it's a unique brand, isn't it? How would you describe the EY brand, especially from your operational delivery perspective?
I think you hit it there. It is unique. I think what we stand for is definitely for quality. Yeah?
Yeah.
So when we do something, we want to do that in the best possible, the best professional way possible. And I think looking at our specialized products, at our product range, whether it's pharma, life, fresh forward, live animals, that is where we can demonstrate that pretty robustly. And I think if I just lead that over to how we do that, it is not only embedded into our processes and procedures, but we basically took the extra step and we decided very consciously to sign up for the IATA CRV certification program. And those three I just mentioned are the ones we have certified. We have recertified some of them already, and that is just showing the commitment we have to the level of detail and then quality we want to bring.
Yeah, I think that's important what you said there, Thomas, about the level of detail and quality, because that's what I always see, whether it's when I'm travelling on Etihad or experiencing any of the activities and the people there. Now, people have always also been a strong point. So your leadership development, and I know Etihad's very, very focused on this. How would you say that leadership approach and teaching people how to lead in a new way is also adding to that focus and the brand and the recognition and the fact that Etihad wants to be seen as being different?
I think when I reflect on the operations side and not only cargo operations, but the wider operations side, we have clear strategic pillars. If I start with the top three, which is safety, service, and profitability, and that is supported by another three, which is people, which is digitization, and then sustainability. And that is exactly what is reflected into our day-to-day. That is reflected into how we approach projects, how we approach the day-to-day business, and that is also reflected in our meeting structures, etc., etc. So that is really where we bring that into the leadership team, and the leadership team from there brings it into the day-to-day business of the wider operational workforce.
Very good. And when you mention the word sustainability, I'm assuming now that we're talking about business sustainability there as well, and how you interact, collaborate, cooperate, communicate with your service partners in the network, the GHAs. So from that perspective, you also, I wouldn't say impose, but you try and make sure that all of your GHA partners, they appreciate and understand what Etihad Cargo and the operation stands for. So how do you make sure that they all consistently deliver that same level of attention to detail and quality across the network that Etihad wants to be seen and experienced by their customer base?
I think the question is very clear. The answer from my side, which I will give you, is probably also very clear, that the devil lies in the detail of how you actually roll that out across the network. But for me, that requires three main things in order to ensure that. One is you need to have a strong team, which is very much aligned to the brand values and what we want to achieve. The second one is you need to have your supplier management toolkit, if I want to call it like that, and you have your operational manuals, you have a contractual framework, you have an SLA with clearly defined deliverables and clearly defined targets. But the third part which you need is partnership, and partnership with your handling providers. So rather than dealing on a purely transactional basis in the industry we are in, there is a level of partnership you need to develop that requires mutual trust, and that will support you to actually deliver the same consistent service levels, whether you talk about Chicago, Frankfurt, Singapore, or Shanghai, so that you have that across the network.
Yes, indeed. And that partnership concept has been going for a long time. And I'm sure, and hopefully, that a couple of our ex-colleagues and in between me and you, so Robert and Andre, will also have a smile on their face from that answer that you've given, which is very good. Now, you mentioned clearly defined twice, and you also mentioned about the partnerships. Now, safety and security, especially at this time in our industry, is probably never more important than now. So what's your emphasis now on the safety criteria that you put across all of your support services? Because obviously they're responsible to deliver, but you're accountable for the deliverables.
Yep. So as part of the strategic pillar, safety is the first one. That's a top priority. Yep. Safety in the sense, when we look at the strategic pillars, it's not only safety, it is, as you said, security, and it is compliance in a broader sense. For safety, that is something which is implemented across the board, where our SMS, so our safety management system, is at the forefront. We in Etihad, I think we have a very strong safety culture, and we do rely on reporting very heavily. Yep. We have a large number of reports, which doesn't mean that we are in an unsafe place. It just means that we do report every occurrence, and that allows us to gain data, and that data is important in order to take a view on things which might lie in the future, so that we can take proper responses to that. So safety is definitely key. Security is a must, and that is something we have a lot of emphasis on when we talk to providers across the network. Safety and then security is the one where you cannot compromise by any means.
Okay, very good. Now, you mentioned there again about data-driven decision making, which is so important, especially in our industry. And we also had a little chat before we went online about the balance between auditing and self-assessment and validation and verification. So I know your opinions on there, and we concur, or we're on the same level. What I'd like to ask you now, as we're coming towards the end of the session, what are the next challenges that you feel that we as an industry and you as Etihad Cargo will face in the coming years?
I think as an industry, and speaking of the operational component, the challenges we currently experience in the handling market across the globe, unfortunately, I don't see them vanishing anytime soon, especially when it comes to shortage of labor or secondary shortage of experienced labor. So that is something the industry need to find a response to, and we need to see how we deal with that in order to get that reliable service delivery which we need. Reliable service delivery, but also safe service delivery, which goes hand in hand there. And I think another challenge is definitely what I mentioned in the beginning around the regulatory frameworks, which are changing. And I think the biggest challenge there is if you have multiple requirements aiming for the same, but following different approaches to get there, which makes it incredibly challenging for a carrier operating globally to bring that all under one roof.
Exactly, yeah. And all the representative bodies now's the time for them to start collaborating and coming together and not pitching against each other. It's so important, and our industry proved that it could be done during COVID. So, we've already set the pace there, so it should be something that can be easily introduced. Almost the last question. Okay, what has been the most rewarding experience during your tenure as head of cargo and deliverables?
I don't think there's only one. There's a multitude of things you need to juggle with on a day-to-day basis. If there would be only one, that would be a concern. But I think definitely if you start drafting or drawing up a structure, and if you fill that with individuals and then them building a team, the team developing and then delivering, that is quite rewarding to see.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a wonderful, and again, something that Robert will probably remember. We had a discussion once, and we said that if you don't realise that the most rewarding and challenging exercise is building that team, and if you don't enjoy that, you get a shock, because once the team's built, just like any other team, they start to have different ambitions. So it's the actual build that's something that's enjoyable and helps people bond together and learn forever. So it's a great thing. Now, you mentioned about cost and the balance, so we've covered that. Just one last thing I'd like to ask you about, and that's the privilege of working in Abu Dhabi. I always found that a wonderful thing, and just from a location and the capital, but also it's a destination in itself. But that the culture and the way of life is also exceptional here, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm approaching 7 years.
7 years?
Almost 7 years.
My goodness.
And all of them in Abu Dhabi. So there is a reason for doing that for 7 years. So it is definitely a place worth to visit, definitely worth to live in.
Yeah. I think it's right up there with any of the places that I've ever lived or worked in. It's fantastic. Thomas, listen, thank you very much for your valuable time. Thank you for the questions and the answers. And also thank you so much for what you've done for Etihad, which is an organisation that I've loved for a long time and will do for a long time to come. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me.